Back when I first moved into this wretched city, I had nothing but a few suitcases and a mind restless from past mistakes. The state itself was new to me, an unfamiliar battleground where I was determined to carve out my place. Before finding a more permanent arrangement, I drifted from one borrowed couch to another, a transient existence that grated on my patience. Then, finally, I secured a roommate, some poor fool named Jason who was moving in from Arizona. The apartment we found was old. Not the charming, vintage kind of old, no, this was the kind that whispered of decades of neglect. It was the kind of place where the walls held onto secrets and the pipes groaned in protest at the simplest demands. The heating was an ancient radiator system that barely worked, and the wiring was so outdated that running too many appliances at once would kill the power in an instant. Jason was still making his way to the city, so I moved in first. Alone. I had no furniture, no comforts, just my bags and a growing sense of unease. The floor became my bed, and the bare walls loomed over me like silent judges. By habit, I always closed the door to whatever room I slept in. It was instinct, an old reflex born from years of distrust. In this apartment, that habit took on a new significance. The bedroom door was stubborn, requiring a firm push to get it shut. It should have stayed that way. But when I woke up the next morning, the door was wide open. I sat up, my breath sharp in my chest. I knew I had pulled it shut, had even given it a testing tug to make sure it was secure. Yet, there it was, gaping open as if welcoming some unseen guest. I told myself it was nothing. The door must have loosened on its own. I convinced myself that the warped wood had simply failed to hold. It was easier to believe that than to consider the alternative. But then it happened again. And again. Every morning, I woke to find the door standing open. It became a pattern, an unwanted ritual. The air in the apartment felt thick, charged with something unseen. I started to notice other things, a sensation of being watched, a faint rustling from the kitchen when I knew I was alone, the creak of floorboards in the dead of night. Then Jason arrived. I had been looking forward to having another person in the apartment, expecting his presence to banish the creeping unease that had settled over me. At first, nothing much changed. We went about our lives, two strangers forced into cohabitation by necessity rather than friendship. But the disturbances did not stop. If anything, they became more insidious. Jason had a habit of getting up in the middle of the night. He always turned the hallway light on when going to the kitchen or bathroom. That was how I knew that the footsteps I sometimes heard were not his. For a year and a half, the strange occurrences remained minor, a door that refused to stay closed, whispers in the silence, the feeling of something unseen lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Annoying, but not enough to make me leave. Not yet. Then, everything changed. A year into my stay, an old friend, Mark, came to visit from Colorado. He was going to crash at my place for a week, just a short visit. We spent the day catching up, drinking, laughing, exchanging stories. But as the night crept in, a dark weight settled over the apartment. We planned to hit downtown early the next morning, so we turned in for the night. Mark took the pull-out couch in the living room, and I retreated to my bedroom, making sure to shut the door firmly behind me. Sleep took me quickly, but not for long. A noise stirred me awake, a low creak, the kind a door makes when it moves slowly, hesitantly. My heartbeat quickened, and my eyes snapped open just in time to see my bedroom door shifting, the knob twisting as if an unseen hand was testing it. I watched, frozen, as the door opened wider and wider until it stopped, yawning open into the dark hallway. I waited, listening for footsteps, breathing, anything. But there was nothing. Just silence. I told myself I had been careless, that I must not have closed the door properly. But my gut twisted with unease. I got up, shut the door again, this time, pressing my weight against it as I latched it shut. Then I crawled back onto the floor, pulling my hoodie's hood over my head to block out the winter chill. I had barely settled when something yanked my hood back with a vicious snap, as if unseen fingers had clenched around the fabric and pulled with force. My breath hitched, my body locked in place. The pressure was undeniable, deliberate. This was not my imagination. Something was here. Something I could not see. And it was not afraid to make its presence known. Morning could not come fast enough. When I finally crawled out of my room, Mark was just waking up, oblivious to what had transpired. I asked him if he had heard anything, if he had noticed my door opening in the night. He looked at me, puzzled. No, man. I didn't hear a thing. I wanted to believe that I had imagined it, that fear had played tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. That apartment held something unnatural, something watching, waiting. I stayed for a few more months, but my unease never faded. The feeling of being watched, of being toyed with, it gnawed at me, a constant shadow at my back. When the opportunity came to leave, I took it without hesitation. I still think about that place sometimes. I wonder if whatever lurked there is still watching, waiting for its next occupant. I am just grateful that I was not foolish enough to stay and find out. Leaving that cursed apartment should have been the end of it. I wanted to believe that whatever had tormented me within those walls was tied to that place, that I had escaped. But I was wrong. It had followed me. The first few weeks in my new apartment were peaceful, almost eerily so. The silence was unfamiliar but welcome. Jason had moved elsewhere, and for the first time in years, I was living alone by choice. The new place was smaller, more modern, and, most importantly, untainted by the oppressive feeling that had suffocated me before. Or so I thought. It started subtly. A misplaced object here, a flickering light there. Normal things. Things I could explain away. But as the weeks passed, those little oddities grew harder to ignore. My bedroom door, which I always left closed, would be open when I woke up. Small noises echoed in the stillness of the night, faint whispers, the soft shuffle of unseen feet. I convinced myself that it was all in my head, a lingering paranoia from my old apartment. But one night, that illusion shattered. I had fallen asleep with my bedroom door firmly shut, but a cold breeze against my face pulled me from unconsciousness. My breath hitched as I cracked my eyes open, my body stiff with an unshakable sense of dread. The door was open. Again. But this time, I was not alone. A shadow stood in the doorway. It was tall, unnaturally so, its outline distorted like a figure submerged in deep water. It did not move, did not breathe. It only stood there, watching. I could feel it. The weight of its gaze pressed down on me, heavy and malevolent. I wanted to move, to scramble away, but my body refused to obey. My limbs were useless, trapped beneath an invisible force. My heart pounded, my chest heaving as panic took hold. The air in the room thickened, every breath a struggle. Then, it moved. A slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. I wanted to scream, to bolt out of bed and flee, but I could do nothing except stare as it drew closer. My vision blurred, my head spinning. My body was betraying me, shutting down beneath the crushing weight of terror. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The pressure lifted. My body lurched upright, and I gasped, choking on air as if I had been drowning. The room was empty, the doorway still gaping open as if it had never been closed at all. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to brush it off. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. A nightmare. A trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever had plagued me in that old apartment had never left. It had simply been waiting. Over the following nights, the presence grew bolder. Objects moved in plain sight. My reflection in the mirror lingered a moment too long after I turned away. My phone would light up with missed calls from an unknown number, only for there to be nothing but static on the other end when I answered. And then there was the whispering. At first, it was faint, just at the edge of my hearing. But it became clearer, more insistent. Low, guttural murmurs slithered through the darkness, their meaning just out of reach. Sometimes, I heard my name. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My thoughts were no longer my own. They twisted, dark and intrusive, filling my mind with things I would never dare to say aloud. I could feel it now, its presence always just behind me, breathing down my neck, watching through hollow, unseen eyes. I knew I could not stay. I had to leave. Again. I packed my things without a plan, without a destination. I did not care where I ended up, so long as it was far, far away from whatever had attached itself to me. As I carried the last box to my car, I hesitated, glancing back at the apartment one final time. The bedroom window stared back at me. And there, in the reflection, I saw it. A figure standing in the room I had just emptied. Watching. Waiting. I turned away, started the engine, and never looked back. Driving away should have given me relief, but instead, a deep unease settled into my bones. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles pale beneath the dull glow of the dashboard lights. The road stretched endlessly before me, an unbroken path of black asphalt cutting through the night, yet I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. Every so often, I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing lurking in the back seat. The shadows in the car felt too thick, too heavy, as if they were pressing in around me. My breath came in shallow gasps, my skin prickling with an invisible presence. I turned up the radio, desperate to drown out the silence, but the static swallowed every station. It was as if the world beyond my car had ceased to exist. After what felt like hours, I pulled into a motel parking lot. It was one of those roadside places, cheap, barely maintained, the neon vacancy sign buzzing in the cold night air. It did not matter. I just needed to rest, to clear my head. The man at the front desk barely looked up as he handed me the key, his face hollow, his eyes sunken as if he had seen too many sleepless travelers just like me. I stepped into the room and locked the door behind me, securing the chain for good measure. The bed was stiff, the air stale, but it was a place to hide. I forced myself to lie down, pulling the thin blanket over my body, but sleep did not come easily. My mind raced, replaying everything that had happened, every shadow, every whisper. Somewhere between exhaustion and paranoia, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was awake again. A deep, suffocating silence filled the room, pressing against my ears. My mouth was dry, my limbs heavy. And then I heard it. The whispering. It was not outside. Not beyond the door or in the parking lot. It was here. In the room with me. A shiver crawled down my spine. I did not dare move, did not even breathe. My eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, but I could feel it, standing at the foot of the bed, watching. The whispers slithered closer, curling around me like smoke, each syllable clawing at my sanity. My name. It was saying my name. Over and over, a sound both familiar and wrong, like a voice imitating human speech but failing to grasp its true essence. Then, the mattress dipped. It was subtle, but unmistakable. As if something had placed weight upon it. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body coiled tight, waiting. The air grew colder, the presence pressing down on my chest, crushing the breath from my lungs. I could not move. I could not scream. It was happening again. The whispering stopped. A moment of unbearable silence stretched between me and the unseen thing beside me. Then, an icy breath ghosted across my face, and a voice, low, guttural, inhuman, spoke directly into my ear. "You cannot run." A jolt of terror surged through me, breaking the invisible chains that held me in place. I bolted upright, gasping for air, my body trembling violently. The room was empty. The door was still locked, the chain undisturbed. But I knew better. It was here. And it was never going to leave. I did not stay in that motel for another night. As soon as dawn broke, I threw my few belongings into my bag and fled. My body ached from exhaustion, my mind frayed at the edges, but I had no choice. I had to keep moving. I drove for hours, mindlessly following the highway, only stopping for gas when I had to. Each time I stepped out of the car, I felt eyes on me. The presence clung to my skin, pressing into my bones. It did not need a place to haunt, it had found a home inside of me. It was in my reflection, in the shadows at the edge of my vision. I heard it in the static on the radio, in the wind howling through the cracks in the car. It whispered when I blinked, when I let my guard down, waiting for the perfect moment to drag me under. At some point, I stopped at a rest area, my body too drained to continue. I locked the doors, reclining my seat just enough to close my eyes, but I did not sleep. I could feel it shifting in the silence, pressing against the thin barrier of reality that kept it from fully breaking through. I must have dozed off despite my fear, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a sharp, jarring noise. My head snapped up, my pulse hammering in my ears. My windshield was fogged, the world outside blurred and unrecognizable. The engine was off. I did not remember turning it off. Then, I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the driver's side window. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The knock came again, 3 precise raps against the glass, patient and expectant. My fingers trembled as I reached for the lock, ready to ensure it was secure, but as I turned my head, my stomach turned to ice. A face stared back at me through the fogged glass. It was wrong. It had my features, my eyes, my mouth, but twisted, stretched in a sickening mockery of my own expression. The lips pulled too wide, the eyes hollow, black pits that saw through me, into me. The thing pressed a single hand to the glass, its fingers too long, its nails cracked and jagged. My breath came in short gasps, panic crashing over me in violent waves. My shaking hand reached for the ignition, fumbling desperately. The figure outside tilted its head, its lips parting, though I heard no words. I did not need to. I knew what it was saying. Let me in. The key finally turned. The engine roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of the rest stop as fast as the car would take me. I did not look back. I could not. If I did, I knew it would be sitting in the passenger seat, grinning at me with that stretched, unnatural face. I drove until I could not drive anymore, until exhaustion blurred the road into nothingness. Eventually, I found myself in another town, another nameless motel. But I knew it would not matter. Nowhere was safe. It would follow. It always did. I am writing this now, though I do not know why. Maybe as proof that I was here, that I existed before it takes me completely. Because I can feel it creeping closer, seeping into my thoughts, twisting them into something dark, something that is not mine. I do not think I will be able to run much longer. I do not think I want to. It is calling me now. Whispering. This time, I think I will listen.